Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Think session. In order to listen to our esteemed panelist, we have put the delegates on mute. If you wish to ask any question to our esteemed panelist, kindly write it on the chat box accordingly. Thank you. Now we will play a short AV of our title sponsor, Century Ply, for the benefit of our audience.
फर्नीचर रेडी है, तुम देख लो एक बार। यू कैन टच इट। ये वायरस से बिल्कुल सेफ है। मतलब सारा फर्नीचर सिर्फ सेंचुरी लैमिनेट्स और प्लाईवुड से बना है। इन दोनों में है वायरल टेक्नोलॉजी, जिसके एक्टिवेटेड नैनो पार्टिकल्स वायरस को मार गिराते हैं। सेंचुरी लैमिनेट्स और सेंचुरी प्लाई, रहो बेफिक्र।
Now I would request our Honorable President, Mr. B.B. Chatterjee, to deliver the keynote speech. Thank you.
No, it's not the, now what has happened? One sec, I seem to have lost it, it seems.
No, sir,
Hello,
we are there.
Sir, you're audible, sir.
Yeah.
You're audible.
I'm audible?
Yeah.
No,
Yes,
something
Yes, sir,
is
you're audible.
happening. Okay. Now, the keynote and everything today is from Mr. Grant Chandali. Now, respected
Yes, sir.
past presidents present this evening, members of the managing committee, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a warm welcome to all of you to today's Think Series program of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This evening, our guest speaker, Mr. Kurush Grant, will share his thoughts on how not to waste a good crisis. The theme is well-timed. All of you will agree in this COVID situation. Mr. Grant will enlighten us on how an organization can come out stronger from a crisis situation. Now I would introduce before you Mr. Kurush Grant, with whom I had the privilege of working for more than a decade or two. Mr. Kurush Grant had a glorious innings in ITC, straddling an array of responsibilities in a span of more than 35 years. He was in sales and marketing, the business heads, initiating new business startups. In fact, he had his finger in the entire ITC pie. He retired as executive director of ITC in 2016. He was on the boards of a number of ITC companies in India and abroad, and has also steered many industry body in different capacities. Presently, Mr. Grant is an independent strategy consultant. Coming from an armed forces background, Kurush Grant personifies dignity and integrity. Before I invite Kurush to the center stage, I would like to thank the sponsors of this evening's program. JIS Group, the chief patron of the Bengal Chamber, Century Ply, our title sponsor, and Calcutta Tree Traders Association, our co-sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, I now welcome Mr. Grant to address you. Kurush, over to you.
Thank you. Mr. President, sir, members of the Managing Council, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege being able to address you. And I really wish I could have been there in person. After all, I've lived in Calcutta for 25 years.
Absolutely.
But COVID-19 and restrictions force us to talk this way. But we've got so used to it now, I think, all of us, that this is the way probably going into the future. A long time back, maybe 12 years back, the Advertising Agencies Association of India, 3As of I, came out with a very interesting seminar, which has a similar name to the, the name of the talk I'm about to give, is How Not to Waste a Good Crisis. This was brought on 12 years back, around the time the world went through a global financial crisis. Nobody was spending any money, and they had to work out how to survive. At that point of time, Mr. Bajaj of the Bajaj Group and I sat together at the All India Management uh, Association, and we tried to create a workshop into what are the good things and bad things companies do and have done, where some of them have survived very well, whereas others have done pretty badly. Uh, what came out of it is that a lot of companies have actually come out of crisis far stronger, far better, and far healthier than when they went in, whilst others perhaps haven't done so well. So let's look at what traditionally happens when a crisis situation takes place. And I'm going to use the bulk of analogies and the bulk of examples, etc., with the current crisis of the lockdowns, the economic lockdowns, the health lockdowns because of the COVID-19 crisis. Everybody, every single company, the first thing to do in a crisis situation is to conserve cash. That's common sense. It makes a lot of sense. Those companies who manage to conserve cash better than others do well. Those companies who are not able to conserve cash don't do well. Most companies, without thinking too much, automatically start reducing overheads and non-productive costs, which is good, which is nice. It's always nice to reduce non-productive costs. But sometimes, perhaps, the reduction of overheads actually backfires on some companies. As long as it's done with a great deal of thought, a great deal of understanding of what particular overhead is being removed, it makes sense. But these are things which every single company does. Unfortunately, a lot of companies instinctively start laying off staff the moment there is a large crisis like the one we saw today. Some small mom and pop companies don't have a choice. There is no funds, there is no money, they have to lay off people. But the bulk of people represented in this organization and whom we are talking to at this point of time are not in that particular situation. Nevertheless, over the last 5 months, I've noticed that a very, very large number of companies have instinctively started off by laying off staff, whether it was required or not. Another thing which most companies do is that they reduce expenditure on something called publicity, whatever that means. It's a very Government of India term, but a lot of private companies tend to use this term. Yeah, publicity per expenditure kam kar lo. Let me share some numbers with you. And this is sort of fresh hot off the presses. As per ADEX, the first half of 2020 saw a reduction of roughly 39% in total advertising expenditure in the country. The second quarter, meaning April, May, June, saw a reduction of 62%. Now, this is what most companies tend to do. Instinctively, expenditure on something called publicity is deemed to be an overhead, a non-productive cost, and most companies reduce it. Fair enough. Most companies also immediately start cutting all sales promotions and discounts and in a key drive to ultimately conserve cash. There is nothing wrong with this. Most companies do this. Recently, I've been consulting with a range of companies, and what I found is that instinctively, whether a company is large, medium, or small, these are the things they start doing immediately. However, when we start looking at those companies which have done well, not only in the current crisis, but in crises going back for the last 40, 50 years, we find that there are certain, I wouldn't call them rules, but there are certain characteristics of good companies and certain characteristics of successful companies who have come through crisis stronger than when they went into it. The first thing companies do is during a crisis situation, and this is surprising, but they all do it, is train, train, and retrain. If people are not able to travel, if people are not able to get to work, train them. It's a lot easier today, exactly the way we are doing it, whether it's on online or whether it is through telephones. But training is something which every single company starts doing for the simple reason that some of the skills and competencies required during a crisis may have been forgotten by people during normal periods of time. All good companies immediately start training their people and, more importantly, retraining them, giving them the knowledge they presumably have, but giving them the skills and the attitudes to actually handle a crisis well. Uh, I can't think of any company who has not done well, which has not spent the initial month of April in training the staff and retraining the staff. The second thing which a lot of companies do is during a crisis, they take the opportunity to do something they should have always done, which is change the organizational structure by reducing levels in the organization. All companies have got levels, and I'm not talking of ranks, I'm talking about actual job levels. Every single company, or rather 90% of companies which have done well, have either done it before the crisis or have used the crisis as an opportunity to do it. They've actually reduced the number of levels in the organization. It could be as little as one. It could be more than one in certain instances. What this does is that it actually makes the company leaner and, more importantly, better able to react to changing environmental modifications which are happening because of the crisis happening. Let me give you some examples. The traditional FMCG sales organization has a regional manager, it has a branch manager, it has somebody below a branch manager, let's call him a territory manager, it has area sales managers, it has sales representatives, etc. That's a lot of levels. Most companies have reduced one level in the last 6 months or the last 5 months, and it hasn't made any difference to the ability on command and control. In fact, what has happened is that they've been able to do rather well. However, when it comes to reducing levels and it comes to looking at people, all companies which are good have also taken this opportunity to do something which perhaps they should have been doing for the last 5 to 6 years, which is reduce and remove non-performing staff. And good companies have done this very kindly. They've retrained people, they've counseled people, and if nothing works, only then have they removed people. Some companies have taken a conscious decision that they will not remove a person from earning salary during the time of the crisis, but they will give the person 6 months, carry on working in the company, and then remove the person, because it's very, very difficult to get a new job at this point of time. But that is one change I've noticed with a lot of very, very good companies. They've used this opportunity to cut deadwood. Honestly speaking, a lot of these companies should have done it over the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's not a good thing to do during a crisis situation, but it is one of the only things you can do during a crisis situation if you actually want to move very, very rapidly. The next thing I've noticed with a lot of companies, particularly consumer-facing companies, be it FMCG, be it brown goods, white goods, electronics, electricals, etc., is that they have changed the terms of trade, particularly when it comes to credit to the trade. Once again, keeping in mind the whole issue of conserving cash, FMCG companies have reduced credit to the trade from between 3 to 7 days. Consumer goods companies have actually reduced credit to the trade. In some examples, going up to, they've reduced it by 21 days, but on the average, they've reduced credit to the trade by 15 days. All of a sudden, when push comes to shove, India Inc. has found that the trade, who always said that they didn't have the funds to actually fund their business, suddenly came up with the cash when there was no alternative. It's a lesson for all of us. All of us have tended to allow our sales organizations to run huge trade credits. And this particular crisis in the last 5 months has shown us that this kind of trade credit is not really required. The money is there. It's a question of utilizing it for your company versus utilizing it for some other alternative investment opportunity by the trader. The next thing that a lot of companies have done, and this is an interesting thing, is they have stepped up advertising and brand communication. Total advertising is down 30% or 60%, depending on which time period you use. But the best of companies have used this opportunity to actually increase advertising and sales promotion. That does not mean they've just wasted money. TV, for example, the spend on TV has come down dramatically. The spend on outdoor advertising obviously has come down dramatically. The spend on print, unfortunately, has come down dramatically because in the initial period, print just wasn't operating in India. However, the expenditure on digital has grown dramatically. And in fact, even in this worst of periods, it has actually remained flat. With a lot of people pulling out of advertising totally, it means that some companies have increased their expenditure on digital by maybe 200, 300, 400%. And that's something which is a good lesson to all of us. It's an old adage that when times are good, when times are stable, good companies must step up advertising. It is also an old adage, however, that when times are bad, the best thing to do is to advertise yourself out of the bad times. And a lot of the better companies who have been successful in handling this particular crisis have actually spent their way out of trouble by spending a huge amount of money on advertising and promotion. That does not mean they've wasted the money. They've changed what they're doing. Media choices have changed pretty dramatically. What was a traditional media plan drawn up by somebody has totally changed. They've spent their monies in a way in which they are able to get to consumers sensibly, aim very, very sharply at them. And today you have the tools to do it. We were very lucky in India that the two biggest nemesis to the free world, Google and Facebook, actually brought in every single algorithm they had to enable India Inc. to focus and target consumers at the lowest possible rate going. This may not be a very good thing in the political sphere because it is seen to be bad, but in the commercial sphere, it has been one of the most useful things India Inc. has seen for a very, very long time. The other interesting thing is a lot of the companies have actually found alternative means to communicate. The traditional cinema, TV, press, radio, media plan, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's good. It has to be done. India is still a country which relies on television for most of its communication. But people have found alternative methods to communicate. The expenditure at point of sale, for example, has shot up dramatically because for the simple reason that the one outing Indian consumers had was to go to the nearby Kirana shop. So expenditure at the Kirana shop, expenditure at the as time progressed, the less important, less priority shops has increased pretty dramatically. And the estimate we have is that it has increased by approximately between 50 to 60% by the top 100 advertisers in this country. What this has done is that it does not mean that the total expenditure has increased. The total expenditure has come down dramatically. But what has happened is that the focus on the relevant outlets has really increased dramatically. Previously, if let us say there were 500,000 outlets in India where consumers would go, today that 500,000 outlets actually came down to maybe 50,000. And those 50,000 had to be merchandised. Those 50,000, you had to ensure that your product was visible, it was available, it was fresh. And that's exactly what a lot of good companies have done. And surprisingly, the companies who have done this the best are not the FMCG companies. The companies who have done this the best are actually the Korean white good companies, followed by some of the Indian white good companies. They've done an excellent and outstanding job, and I must really compliment them for that. The other thing which people have done is that they've looked for unexpected price offs and they've leveraged their business plans based upon this. And let me give you the example of how some companies have leveraged media. Amul, the new chief executive, Sadar gentleman, a very fine uh, manager, realized that because people would not be advertising, because people would not be spending money, television rates, the rate to purchase television ads would come down dramatically. So he bought up a huge quantity of TV rights at very, very, very low rates. And he went hell for leather in advertising, promoting, distribution, making sure his product was available. Amul's results have been declared, they have been outstanding. And once again, I must compliment a company like Amul, which is a cooperative, which is not the traditional high-flying marketing company, but they've done a fantastic job. They've leveraged low prices during a crisis. They've negotiated better than anybody else, absolutely better than any single person going. And this negotiation was done to a very large extent by themselves and not really the media agencies concerned, although they were involved in all fairness. Another good example was transporters and freight. Product was not moving. A lot of factories were shut. A lot of trucks were therefore available. A lot of companies have negotiated with transporters, have negotiated with fleet owners for reducing rates pretty dramatically to make sure that their products were available. These reduced rates were both in terms of rupees per ton as well as number of days of delivery. So all of a sudden, supply chains shrank. Supply chains which were taking 5 days, 4 days, suddenly shrank down to 2 days because better negotiations took place at a point of time. Now, one can say that that these companies were exploiting transporters or exploiting media owners, but the point is it was inventory going unutilized. And whenever inventory is going unutilized, you need to take the best advantage of that surplus inventory. Another good example which people have used is as far as real estate is concerned. You're all aware that until fairly recently, a lot of malls in India were shut. Shut not only in large metros like Calcutta and Bombay and Delhi, etc., but they were also shut in smaller towns. Smart companies gave up warehouses and negotiated with mall owners to convert large portions of the mall into warehouses for their products. They bought space in these malls, huge spaces, unutilized, nobody is going there at dirt cheap rates, and have utilized the mall for 3 to 4 months until malls started coming back and they made longer term arrangements and they started doing exceedingly well. I've promised not to name names as far as the malls are concerned, but for the rest, examples are easily available. Another interesting thing is that most people would have assumed that in a volatile market, in a crisis, it's very, very difficult to, and perhaps not worthwhile, launching new products, launching new brands, launching new offers. So along comes Britannia, along comes ITC, along comes Hindustan Unilever, along comes Marico, along comes XYZ, and they all launched a stream of new products, far more than they normally would have. And in all fairness, the results are showing that it's paid off. The learning is very clear. Stable markets, need new offers. There's no question about it. But volatile and crisis-ridden markets need new offers as much as stable markets do. And those companies which have come out with new offers, which have come out with variants, which have come out with something which excite consumers, have done a lot better than companies which have not done so. The best, of course, example I can give you in this case is those of food products. Everybody's at home. People who've never been to a kitchen in their lives have started cooking. Everybody has become a home baker. Everybody has become a great home chef. Guess what the increase in sale of custard powder and baking powder and corn flour was in the last 4 months? It shot up by 100%. It shot up by 150, 200%. It may come down in the future, but somebody has taken advantage of it. And somebody has made sure that variants are available, options are available, products to the new type of consumer, the amateur consumer, the you and I, who never, honestly, I mean, my knowledge of cooking was zero. I can make toast. But during this crisis, everybody became a cook. And those people who took advantage of that fact, whether it was manufacturers of microwaves, of ovens, of refrigerators, everybody started addressing those, and the good companies started doing well. Down to the extent that I'm given to understand that there is such a shortage of cooking appliances today in the country, be it microwaves, be it ovens, be it refrigerators, etc., that industry cannot keep pace. Factories which were running on 2 shifts are running on 3 shifts. Supply chains from China have clearly got affected, but people moved very, very quickly. Supply chains have started operating out of Turkey, out of Western Europe, out of Malaysia, and people have started doing exceedingly well. So the faster you move, the faster you create new products to take advantage of market situations, even in a situation where uh, uh, there is a crisis in the marketplace, the better it is. The next thing a lot of companies have done, and this is particularly valid for consumer-facing companies, I got to admit, is they got the distribution in order. Everybody knows that the ultimate objective of good distribution is something called 100% OTIF, OTIF standing for on time in full. Your factory must ship out exactly what, by SKU, by day, by hour, what has been ordered on the factory. Nobody has reached 100% OTIF in this country, ever. However, in the last 5 months, a lot of companies have actually inched up from 91, 92% to 96, 97%. And they've done that irrespective of the fact that there's been labor shortage, people have been missing, but they've actually gone and done it. They've organized themselves to ensure that the dream goal of distribution, zero stockouts across the entire supply chain, has not been achieved. But if stockouts were in a really great company, if stockouts were 3%, is now down to 1%. And that is absolutely outstanding and excellent. And using this as an opportunity to push, and using a crisis as an opportunity to make sure that certain basic elements of what should be done get done, has been the hallmark of most successful organizations. And I got to admit here, I'm talking fundamentally of consumer-facing companies with consumer-facing products. A lot of good companies, and I've advised a lot of good companies to do this, and fortunately they followed it, is keep your customers and consumers with you. How do you keep your consumers with you? You keep your consumers with you by talking to them. You talk to them through communication, through advertising, through interacting with them through digital medias. You keep your consumers engaged with you by making sure that the relationship you have with your consumers are not lost. But it is equally important to keep your customers with you. Your customers are also businessmen. Whether it is your distributor, your wholesaler, your retailer, every single good company has ensured that from the head of sales downwards, their customers were engaged from day one onwards. People have talked to them. Where it is not possible to have visited them in the shop or in their houses, people have spoken to them over phone, over Skype, over Zoom. But every single customer, retailer, distributor was talked to. If there was any issues with their family, if somebody was sick, assistance was given to them. And this made sure that the bond between the retail chain, between the customers of organizations and the organizations, remained very strong, and in fact grew, because it is really in a time of a crisis that human beings start realizing who their real friends are. Some companies ignored it. They haven't done too well. Some companies have made a virtue out of it, and they've done exceedingly well. Ultimately, it is extremely important to reassure your consumers, to reassure your customers that you're there with them. You're not going to let them down. Reconnect, renew relationships, and make sure that your consumers and your customers retain the bond of association which you've tried to build up for so many years. Obviously, coming even closer to home, you have to look after your people. And when I say look after your people, I mean, we've all heard of keep a very happy workforce, etc. certain functions cannot be delegated by senior management, and I'll address it shortly. But every single good company has ensured that certain key functions were never delegated by senior management, but they retained it within themselves. Senior management has to be seen. Senior management has to be visible. If you ask your team to do something, go out to the retail market during times of COVID. Get e-passes from the police and make sure that your distribution happens. And if you don't do it yourself, then you are letting down your team. And more importantly, the trust your team has in you will start getting vitiated. Every single good company ensured that not only was the entire sales team in the marketplace, but more importantly, the entire leadership team was in the marketplace, either physically, if it was possible, or digitally, if it was not possible. How many times have I seen branch managers of companies ringing up families of salespeople who are on tour, families of managers working in factories who have not been able to come back because they realize that they've got to literally stay in the factory overnight to make sure things happen. In good companies, I've seen it happen all the time. It is the branch managers, it is the regional managers' responsibility not only to look after the interest of their salespeople, of their factory people, of their office people, but their families also. And this, I believe, distinguishes a good company and a great company. Great companies have done this, and great companies have succeeded as a consequence of doing this. There are three functions which I've always believed cannot be delegated. And these three functions, you delegate the action, you delegate the delivery, but you cannot delegate leadership. The first, and this is an old one, marketing is too important to business to keep in the hands of the marketing department. And I maintain this once again. When I talk about marketing, I'm not talking about creating of ads. I'm not talking about traditional brand management work. But the key elements of marketing, the decisions on portfolio strategy, the decisions on product strategy, the decisions on pricing strategy, positioning strategy, these are senior management decisions. These are not functional decisions. And unless the senior leadership of organizations own these, it becomes even more difficult in times of a crisis because very, very often functional leadership wants functional excellence and not necessarily business excellence. The second part, and this I think is the most important, what is loosely called HR and human relations. The HR department is there to assist senior management and the leadership teams to enhance their people's lives. HR, the enhancement of people's lives cannot be delegated to the HR department. It is a leadership function. Where the leadership in organizations have made sure it is their own, without necessarily even thinking about it. In a lot of good companies, it just happens because senior management realize that looking after people is their responsibility, not the HR department's responsibility. The HR department has a very, very important responsibility to implement a lot of decisions which the senior leadership team takes. The responsibility and accountability of ensuring that your people are happy, your people are productive, your people work rests with senior management. And in a crisis situation, this becomes even more important. In a crisis situation, if you leave the relationship with your team, with your people, to functional heads, to the HR department, you are letting your people down. I don't know of any good organization, whether it is a so-called professional organization or a owner-driven organization, but in all good organizations, the senior leadership team has taken ownership of this. I've seen it happen, and fortunately for me in Pune, where I'm based, there's a huge amount of industry in Pune, whether it is heavy industry, heavy engineering, light engineering, large scale, medium scale, small scale. Pune is a very, very big industrial hub. And what I've noticed is that in in all cases where the industry has done well, where the company has done well, even if the industry is not doing that well, the senior leadership team has taken accountability and responsibility of human relations. The next area is sales, and it becomes even more difficult in times of crisis. Salespeople are out there in the marketplace. They are alone and they're afraid because nobody tells them what to do. More often than not, the very, very important uh, competence and skill of a salesperson is not being gregarious and being friendly with people and being able to get along with people, but being able to take decisions and do business alone. Because the bulk of salespeople are alone in the marketplace. They don't have a big team of people around them at any point of time. They have to take decisions by themselves and they're alone. Consequently, particularly during a crisis, when there is a problem of actually getting information from the marketplace and getting productivity through the sales force, leadership from the front becomes very, very important. Quite honestly, if your head of sales is sitting in head office, get rid of your head of sales. He should not be there. He should be out in the market. There is absolutely no reason for the management of sales to be happening from some kind of head office scenario. I was surprised to see not only head of sales, but managing directors, CEOs, heads of production, heads of HR, all of them in the marketplace, interacting with consumers, interacting with customers, interacting with their own team, all of them out upfront in the factories, interacting with people in organizations which have done and have come out of this crisis, although the crisis is still not fully over, much better than their peers who have not done that. I happen to belong to various school groups, as all of us do. For some reason, a lot of my school friends have run companies, either their own companies or they've run companies for other people. And discussing with them, what has come through very clearly is that what I'm talking about now, they have seen across every single industry which India is really represented on. Some of these are not industry specific. Some of these are generic to any leadership position, be it in the administrative services, be it in the police services. Those states and those cities, for example, where the administration and police have been upfront leading the fight against COVID, have done a lot better than those who have not. It sounds common sense, but unfortunately, not everybody has followed this. Those who have followed it have done remarkably well. The last interesting point with a lot of successful companies, and I'll give you some data before that. Data worldwide, and including in India, is that the number of meetings in the last 5 months went up on the average by 45 to 50% compared to the number of meetings which were organized and held by management prior to the crisis. The length of the meeting was only marginally lower than what a physical meeting would have been. Nevertheless, the number of meetings went up. These meetings were by and large not for strategic planning. These meetings were not for strategic thinking, brainstorming. The bulk of the meetings were review meetings by senior management. In a time of crisis, please don't waste your workforce's time, your team's time, your manager's time in too many meetings, in reviewing what they're doing all the time. It's like that plant which is weak because the weather is bad. You're constantly pulling the plant out to check whether the roots are fine or not. You'll kill the plant. Good organizations have meetings, definitely. They review what is happening, definitely. But more often than not, it takes 5 minutes, maybe a couple of times a week, and that's it. The greater the number of meetings you have, invariably I found correlates very, very strongly with the lack of effectiveness of leadership in handling a crisis. Too many reviews, too many team meetings are bad. They are not good. I've seen this in heavy industry. I've seen this in small industries. I've seen it in retail. I've seen this in the service industry in the recent past. Wherever there have been far too many reviews by senior leadership because the senior leadership didn't have the guts to go out into the marketplace themselves, go out into the factories themselves. This is what has actually happened. In hindsight, a lot of what, in conclusion rather, a lot of what I've been talking about is actually common sense. It is normal, good business practice. But a crisis is a time when it is actually important that a lot of these precepts and a lot of these activities actually are brought to the fore, because if they are not brought to the fore, things often tend to fail. And let me tell you another thing which some of these good companies have done. Whether COVID-19 had happened or not, a lot of good organizations create crisis deliberately in their organizations to make sure that the organizations are reactive fast enough and are able to handle crisis when a real crisis comes along. Whether it is formal game playing and role playing, whether it is decisions like, and I've done it in the past, switch off a factory, see what happens. Can your supply chain manage? It works. You can train organizations to handle crisis. And the only way to train an organization to handle crisis is to follow these precepts, not just during a crisis, but right throughout. In conclusion, I would just like to say that India Inc. has faced a major challenge. We are very lucky that the bulk of organizations, the bulk of companies have done remarkably well in handling this crisis. They, I suspect, will come out of the crisis in some industries, in some cases, badly, but in the bulk of cases, they'll come out, I believe, far stronger than when they went into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for such an enriching session. We will once again play the short AV of our title sponsor, Century Ply, for the benefit of our audience.
फर्नीचर रेडी है, तुम देख लो एक बार. यू कैन टच इट. ये वायरस से बिल्कुल सेफ है. मतलब सारा फर्नीचर सिर्फ सेंचुरी लैमिनेट्स और प्लाईवुड से बना है. इन दोनों में है वायरकल टेक्नोलॉजी, जिसके एक्टिवेटेड नैनो पार्टिकल्स वायरस को मार गिराते हैं. सेंचुरी लैमिनेट्स और सेंचुरी प्लाई, रहो बेफिक्र.
I would like to now request Mr. Anup Hoon, Chairperson Marketing and Brand Committee, to take it forward. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and I must begin by thanking Mr. Grant. I think what you really said is so true and so correct. And, while you look at organizations across the spectrum, it's very clear those who followed these things and the others who haven't followed it. It's so very clear. And, it was the second week of April, I was talking to someone. And most companies, as you rightly said, training, keeping in touch with their dealers, keeping in touch with their influencers, keeping in touch with their team, right? And it's so surprising that a very large organization whose managing director actually made it a point. He's got a sales force of about 700 people across the country to talk to every person in the field, starting from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. Right, and it was just 2 minutes. HR was giving him the names, correcting up and patching up the call, and so I think the things which you said are so very right. And organizations preparedness. It's like you keep doing an emergency drill, right? And when it actually happens, you know how to fight it out, right? So I must thank you. because I think it's important for people to know that you should not really be waiting for a crisis. You should be actually preparing for one,
Yeah.
right? Because otherwise you're in a reactive mode. But proactive organizations stand prepared, and I think successful are those who are proactive. So it's as simple as all that. Okay, I have a few questions from the audience, so I will put them across to them. Uh, this question is from Mr. Shumit Roy. Would you say that companies should welcome crises because these crises bring out the best in people? That's the question.
There's some companies, and I believe a large part of ITC is one of them, who thrive better in a crisis than under normal circumstances. I suspect they've got the kind of people who tend to get bored very easily otherwise. But jokes aside, um, nobody likes a crisis. I wouldn't wish a crisis like this on anybody. But if you plan for a crisis and you create mini crises all the time in your organization to make sure that your training and your ability to react to a real crisis is a good one, to that extent, a crisis is good. But having a real crisis on you, I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Okay. The next question, which is also from Mr. Shumit Roy, do you foresee more people joining Generation X or Z and working from home in the future?
The jury is out on this. On the one hand, a lot of people uh, are saying that the real estate market, for example, has seen a major decline in future demand for office space, and this is data published in newspapers and magazines, and even RARA in Maharashtra, RARA had published a note on this subject. Having said that, um, there's a very interesting WhatsApp forward going around that this man was having a discussion with his boss. He was sitting at home, his boss was sitting at his home, and this young man's mother walked into the room and did something, and the boss got very upset that how dare this lady walk into the room, this is a formal meeting, and disturb him. And he yelled at the young manager. The mother, being a good Indian mother, threw the boy out of his chair, sat down in her chair, and blasted the boss, saying, "This is my house. I live here. You have not rented this place. I am doing you a favor. I am doing the organization a favor by allowing my son to work from my house for you." Now, therefore, we are facing a contradiction of opinions out here. On the one hand, it is very easy to say work from home, work from home, work from home. The reality is that it is extremely difficult to work from home. Indians have been remarkably patient with their organizations in arranging it. Can you imagine a situation where husband and wife are both working, 2 children, all of them needing laptops? Very few households have 4 laptops. Very few households in India have the bandwidth at this point of time. Perhaps Mukesh Ambani will organize it in the future, but have the bandwidth at this point of time to be able to actually handle 4 Zoom calls simultaneously. Working from home is going to reduce dramatically in a lot of areas where the need to be in touch with consumers and customers happen. Out there, I suspect India is going to go back wholesale back into the marketplace where it is required, and work from home is going to stop. On the other hand, what I suspect is going to happen is that there is going to be a lot more use of the tools used in working from home. Digital conversation as opposed to physical meetings, etc., going ahead into the future. The building where I live in, there happen to be several builders who live here. The jury is out amongst them. Some of them are saying that in the short run, they are expecting a major problem as far as commercial real estate is concerned, because there is no demand for it. And I'm not talking about shopping, I'm talking about office space. However, what they're saying, and this is interesting, a lot of the large organizations outside India who have got call centers and who've got developmental centers and research and R&D centers in India are actually seeking more space because they're trying to reorganize their office space on the basis of social distancing, etc. God forbid this ever happens again, rather than making everybody work from home. So the jury is out. I think in some areas, working from home will continue, but in most areas it won't. But the tools and processes of working from home, communication digitally as opposed to physical travel, etc., the removal of unnecessary physical meetings, etc., that is going to continue.
Kurush, if I may be permitted to add.
Please.
A couple of weeks ago, I was reading that in France, what happened was that 18 of the top chefs, all the Michelin chefs, actually wrote to the president saying, you've got to open cafes because they're part of our culture. It's not something that you only go for a cup of coffee. There is human interaction.
Yeah.
Right? And that's very important. I mean, some of the works of art, etc., the creativity which flows, and when you sit there watching people, right, that phenomena is extremely important to our culture, is how they had put it. I was listening to a number of people, and I think, probably as far as first is IT will be probably a mixed bag where you'll have maybe thrice a week you do go to office and the other days you work from home. So it's a mix and match because people must recognize that when you go to office, there are certain things which are happening. You're meeting your colleagues, there is team building which is taking place, you identify with the corporate, with the organization, etc., etc., and the human element of knowing each other well enough comes up, which, when you work from home, when we keep talking to each other, etc., you do miss meeting your friends, right? And I have grandchildren, so they miss going to school and they want to go play with their friends and they want to hug them and they want to hold them, and we are depriving them of all that. It has to come back. It's not that it's not going to be there. So I think it's going to be a mixed bag which is there. It cannot be only work from home, nor can we possibly go back to the whole thing. So it might be somewhere in between. Okay. Next question is from Suchandra Mukherjee. How can the management of an organization give crisis training? Which aspects should they follow?
The senior leadership of any organization has to look at one particular aspect, which is risk management. In fact, today with a lot of large companies, it is a compulsory practice, even by law, to look at risk management. When you're looking at risk management, you need to evaluate what are the possible risks to the organization, what are your reactions to the risk, what preparations are you making to handle the risks. If done in a formal, planned manner, it will help the organization develop competencies to handle the risks. In some cases, risk management may mean duplication of resources. In some cases, risk management may mean training of people. In most cases, rather, it will mean training of people. In some cases, it may mean creating strategies to make sure that risks, when they happen, when a crisis actually happens, you're better able to cope for it. Let's forget the term crisis. Just look at the classical term of risk management. Risk management has been practiced in India for a very long time. When done well, you are automatically training yourself to handle crisis.
Okay, I'll take the next question. How should an organization tackle its competitors in such a crisis? What should be the strategy? That's a question.
Yeah. I hate to say it. I probably have more friends, or I probably had more friends in ITC's competitor companies, be it Unilever or Britannia or Godfrey Phillips or packaging organizations, etc., than I had in ITC, or at least the same number. You can work together with competition without necessarily violating law. And I'll give you a small example. Supply chains. Why do you need to compete unnecessarily on supply chain when there is a waste of supply chain, when there is a shortage. When there is a shortage of, let's say, transportation, can you work with competitors, be it direct competitors or people who are operating from the same market and need to move product from point A to point B? There is a lot you can do working with competition. Having said that, ultimately, competitors are competitors. And therefore, you need to be smarter than competitors. It's not a question of handling your competition. Uh, you have to assume and presume that your competitors are going to be as smart as you, if not smarter. And therefore, what can you do to outsmart them? To that extent, competition remains.
Correct, absolutely right. And again, just adding on, there are some parts of the country and some terrains which are extremely challenging. Things might have changed in the last couple of months, but if you were servicing markets up in Ladakh, Leh, etc., typically between March and April and end of October, after which anyway it shuts down. It's surprising how competitors work with each other together, right? And they're not stepping on each other's toe. They're very conscious of the fact that it is collaboration or co-creation, right? So I think, it does happen. And I have heard of examples in this crisis where a lot of product categories have worked together. Okay, the next question, there are two more. Kurush, I'm going to put the cap there.
Sure.
Okay. As far as immunity products are concerned, it's being stretched too far by too many product categories. The example which is being given to me is from a company which I worked for a very long time called Asian Paints. So, Asian Paints coming into sanitizers. So, do you think it's getting stretched a little too far?
There is still a shortage of good quality products in the marketplace. Like any category in which there is a sudden demand, you will find hundreds of people trying to produce products. But people who are able to produce a good quality product, which has a promise which people will believe, are still not necessarily too high. It's still relatively small. Those companies or those brands which come from a base of which assists and helps them in, let's say, the sanitizer market or the gloves market or the mask market, will do better. Those who are coming from, being absolutely cold and coming in from the cold, will find it a lot harder to do it. And it's not just the question of the Asian Paints and the big companies from doing it. The number of small scale industries who have come out with sanitizers, some extremely dangerous, some very good products, are remarkable. India is very, very quick to react to potential demand. And to that extent, I think it's a great thing. Has it gone over the top? Yes, it has gone over the top. The issue is so what? The better organizations, the better brands will still survive.
Okay. I'm constrained to react to that, so I'm not. Okay. From Dipan Bhattacharya, this is the last question.
Sure.
Would this crisis result in some kind of deglobalization?
I think it already has. It already has. On the other hand, in certain areas, the way the world has worked together when it comes particularly to vaccine generation and manufacture, etc. And I happen to be living in a place and I know the people who are actually probably going to be making India's first successful vaccines, which is the Serum Institute. The world has come together in a lot of ways, far better than they've ever have in the past. Having said that, global supply chains have proved to be dangerous when you're reliant too heavily on single source supply chains and supply chains which can be impacted by political decision making. To that extent, I suspect that there will be a lot more variations in supply chain, whether it is made in India or whether it is bought from other places. The jury is still out. It remains to be seen. The government is trying a lot to make sure that the facilitation process for manufacturing in India increases. I really pray and hope that it succeeds.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. It's been very nice of you to have taken out time. And I'm sure everyone's enjoyed the talk. I've been seeing the comments down below in the chat box. And obviously, this is a city which you've lived in. And I'm sure you have a lot of friends here who miss you. And I, for one, have heard so many kind things about you. So thank you very much. Stay safe, look after yourself. And we from the chamber may still make demands on you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I must also thank our sponsors, the chief patron JIS Group, the title sponsor Century Plyboards, the co-sponsors, the Calcutta Tea Traders Association, and all our members and guests who have taken out time this evening to come and hear Mr. Grant talk. You know, it's an endeavor. The Think series is an endeavor by the Chamber and the Marketing Committee to get people to hear those who have experienced or been through, industry and share their experiences. So I think it's a learning platform and a sharing platform. So thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to having all of you with us in our next Think session, which we shall announce in due course. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Stay safe. Look after yourself. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you.